All right, Braves fans, let's get rolling. I'm George McNair, and this is State of the Braves. Well, guys, hate to break it to you, but the season is over for the Braves. Yeah, they get unceremoniously bounced very quickly from the playoffs by the San Diego Padres. And, in a lot of ways, you kind of see it coming, especially with the Chris Sale injury, the way that the Braves had to sneak into the playoffs on the very last day, having 0 days between the regular season ending and the playoffs beginning, having to go across country to the West Coast, play literally the hottest team in baseball, at least in the second half, in the San Diego Padres. I think as soon as that series started, you saw what the Braves were really up against, and it was a stark contrast in particularly offenses. I mean, I think if the Braves were able to set up their pitching staff exactly how you wanted, and Chris Sale was not injured, maybe they could overcome the Padres in a shortened series like that, but that wasn't the case. Of course, they have to throw A.J. Smith-Shawver in what was pretty much a totally unfair position to put him in, and you really can't blame him. And yet, the Braves only give up 4 runs in that first game. All things considered, not too bad, and yet they can't score a single run in that game. And then game 2, Fried, you feel obviously much better about him going in game 2 and your ability to survive and get to a game 3. He takes that line drive off the backside, and that thing starts tightening up, and he just clearly was not locating very well in that second inning. So we're going to obviously get into the series a little bit more as we go, but let's be honest, pitching health for the Braves falters at the worst possible time for the 3rd straight season. I mean, it's really unbelievable. With all the things that the Braves did to try to make that not happen this year, it still happens. And, of course, the offense was decimated beyond repair. And, again, like I said, it's just very obvious as you're watching the Padres. That is a legitimate World Series caliber. We'll see what the Padres do, but World Series caliber offense. They've got to go up against the Dodgers now, so the Dodgers, might take care of business there, but the Padres look pretty good at the same time. So, yeah, I couldn't help but watch this series and be completely jealous of what the Padres fans got to experience this year. A fully healthy offense, really firing on all cylinders. San Diego's offense is incredibly balanced. It's kind of the way that I really wish the Braves offense was constructed, and maybe can be constructed moving forward. Very obviously, as the Braves get healthy in the offseason, that's going to be the biggest thing to improve the Braves offense. But, and I still think the Braves, if in a different, in a multiverse, right? If the Braves had a fully healthy lineup with a Ronald Acuna Jr. and with an Austin Riley and everybody firing on all cylinders, I still think that version of the Braves offense is better. But man, I think this balanced lineup for the Padres just plays really, really well in the playoffs. Again, the Braves pitching did a pretty good job. I mean, allowing 4 runs in the first game, 5 runs in the second game, but just still not able to get the offense going much at all other than Michael Harris. I mean, Michael Harris had 2 great games, and it just wasn't much else beyond him. So it's just, this series to me, it's a reminder of how weakened the Braves offense really was, especially by the end of the year, and how far off course I think the Braves hitting philosophy has gotten, right? Just so much swing and miss, 0 patience at the plate. Michael King on one hand, looked completely dominant in that first game, but I also think the Braves hitting approach was so bad at the same time. The umpire was pretty bad too, but I mean, there was so much, just really, really bad chasing of balls that were nowhere close in that game. And so just the lack of patience, the lack of a game plan, especially the lack of a 2-strike hitting approach from the Braves is just really, really obvious. So, ultimately did home runs beat the Braves? No, right? It was this balanced approach. I mean, tons of weak contact by the Padres in game 2, but they were able to, with two outs in that second inning, they just kept the inning going, and then they got a couple doubles that broke the game open early. for them. So yeah, I mean, game one, yeah, they had the Tatis big home run in the first inning. But again, if you can't score for the Braves, if you can't score, you can't win, and if you can't make contact, you typically can't score. So that was the big problem for the Braves. They just didn't have enough firepower going into this series. Even if Chris Sale does pitch game one, maybe they lose that game because they didn't score in game one. So look, how should the Braves feel? I don't know about how we should feel about this season. Some seasons feel magical. I mean, like 2021, the first half of the season was terrible, and then the rest of the season, you just started to feel like, man, they might just be, you say team of destiny. I mean, I don't know what that means, but just things are everything's just falling right, and it seems to happen to certain teams. Some seasons feel more balanced, right? Some good and some bad, and you just kind of go from there. But then some seasons feel like it's just not your year, and that it from the very beginning, from Strider's injury on, it just felt that way for the Braves, and maybe that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe that's part of the mental game that you have to overcome, that this team, ultimately wasn't able to. But the reality is the injuries still did come, right? And they just kept coming and kept coming, and it's really hard. Ultimately to get over that, right? Eventually you come to the end of your rope and you just don't have enough talent on the field to make it happen. So yeah, what were the, some of the big things where you're just like, this is not our year, right? It's injuries. It's terrible batted ball luck when they did make contact. And again, they didn't make contact enough throughout this year. A lot of swing and miss, a lot of strikeouts. But when they hit the ball hard, it just seemed like they constantly were, had terrible batted ball luck. And then the third thing, nearly every position player on this team had a subpar season. So it wasn't just injury. It was also when the guys were on the field, they did not play at the same level as they played really throughout their careers. And certainly they didn't play at the same levels they did in 2023. So, injuries, I'll get back to that. The one issue I kind of have with these injuries, the Braves had a ton of ligament and muscle injuries, and it really just starts to make me question. Injuries at some point you can't predict them, you can't fully prevent them, but there is some preventative measures that, this is the point of having training staffs and all of these types of treatments to try to prevent as much as you can injuries. And certainly the Braves, I think it's easy to say the Braves were the most injury-riddled team in baseball this year. You look at most of the other teams in the playoffs, and they might not be entirely healthy, but they're much healthier than the Braves. And especially when you look at position players, right? Pitchers, state of the game right now, arms blow out. So I'm not necessarily thinking about pitchers as much as position players and keeping them healthy and on the field and playing at a pretty high level. And the Braves just honestly weren't able to do that. So, broken bones, they happen. And they're a little more freak and hard to prevent, right? The Riley injury, Ozzie, when he broke his hand wrist, these things just happen. But these ligament injuries and muscle injuries, you just start thinking, is there a failure of the Braves to be able to kind of prepare their players in game and between games and what they're doing? And I don't want to throw anybody on the training staff under the bus, but it just seemed like, man, there was a lot of stuff going on that really derailed the Braves in big ways this year. You start going through the injuries that are not broken bones, right? You talk about Sean Murphy, first game of the year, that oblique injury that seemed to just totally crater his entire season. Strider, by his second start, right? His ligament, UCL goes out. Of course, Ronald Acuna with his ACL, there's another ligament injury. Michael Harris, hamstring, muscle injury. Fried goes on the IL, his, elbow inflammation. Mentor goes down for the year. That's a ligament injury to his hip. Lopez, ligament injury, he comes back, but again, inflammation. And then ultimately Chris Sale, muscle injury, back spasms, all that stuff. So, all of these muscle and ligament injuries, it's just like, man, look, outside of Acuna's ACL, all of these are pretty common baseball injuries, but it's just the amount that the Braves had to go through, um, and compared to the most of the other teams in the league, it's striking. It's apparent that the Braves had to deal with more of these injuries. So again, maybe you just say bad luck. The injury bug just hit the Braves more than other teams, but you'd like to say that there are some actions that the Braves can take to avoid some of these injuries or limit some of these injuries, or when they happen, that you can bounce back a little better. I mean, you injure a ligament, you're done for a long time. But there certainly are things to do to try to prevent some of these injuries, and hopefully the Braves are going to adjust some of the things they do to prepare themselves. I think that's one of the things that has just felt true um, coming out of spring training. It's like they just did not seem ready, right? Physically ready, and ready at the plate. Just so many issues with with struggles at the plate early on. So, um, but injury certainly got this team. The other thing one of the other things I mentioned, terrible batted ball luck when they made contact. I'm going to talk about that a little later in the episode. The third thing that I mentioned was that nearly every position player on this team had a subpar year. Let's just think about that in a couple different ways. So, like in 2023, the fifth, this is a little random to me, but I'm picking the fifth best position player in 2023. That person, by wins above replacement, was Michael Harris with a 3.4 WAR season, according to Baseball Reference. The Braves in 2023 had 6 position players with over 3 WAR. And remember, 3 WAR is basically like you're a good, above average starting player in the big league. So they had 6 position players with over a 3 WAR season in 2023 and 3 players in the top 10 in the MVP vote that year. Okay, so in 2024, the 5th best position player by WAR was Ozzie Albies, who basically missed half the season. He had a 1.6 WAR. The Braves had only 3 position players over 3 WAR, and likely only Marcell Ozuna will be in the top 10 in MVP voting. Maybe. I'm kind of assuming he will be, even though he's a DH. So we'll see. So the only Braves to have better 2024 seasons than last season in 2023 were Marcell Ozuna, that's not a surprise, and Travis d'Arnaud, who had a pretty down 2023. They were the only 2 players who also met or exceeded expectations from Fangraphs WAR projections from the preseason. So you had or underperformance from almost everybody on the team. And again, some of that's injury related, but not from everybody. So how should Braves fans feel about this Braves team this season? I'm certainly not going to tell you guys how to feel, but I think there's some places you could go with this season that's been, just full of hardships, full of heartbreak, full of losing our star players and not being able to see them play. Look, do I feel proud of this team and that they overcame so much to make the playoffs? Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a part of me that's like, okay, they didn't crater. They didn't. I think a lot of teams would have just fallen apart. There probably would have been a lot more internal conflict, right? None of that happened. They stuck together. Okay, so I can be proud in that sense. But I'm also disappointed in the team at the same time. They just seemed lifeless by the end of the year. Like they did kind of, I mean, they got in, right? But man, that Padres series, it's just like, I think they kind of were done. I don't think they expected to win that series. And I think that's kind of how they played, right? And I'm also disappointed with the guys who never were injured and just simply underperformed this year. So yeah, I think there's room for plenty of emotion related to this team. I do think that it's true that this team showed a ton of character, right? They didn't fold. They kept grinding. They ultimately made the playoffs. Now, they got some help from the Diamondbacks, who had a little bit of a mini collapse at the end of the year to let the Braves in. But, they did get in, and that does matter. It is an achievement, and the team as a whole, I think, they can hold their heads high in regards to that. But I think they also all know that they could have played better throughout this season. The guys who were on the field for nearly the entire season outside of Ozuna, I mean, they underperformed and also did a pretty poor job of correcting some of the performance issues that were happening throughout the year. So let's dive into the Padres Braves series just a little bit and what I saw, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what's to come for the Braves in this offseason. So, pitching wise, look, if the Braves were going to make an October run this time around, it was going to be about the pitching and then some timely hitting, right? You just get enough hitting to move on, but it was going to be about dominant pitching. So with the Braves needing to go full tilt until the last game of the season with 0 days off between the regular season and the playoffs, and then the Chris Sale injury, right? They were put basically in the worst possible spot to succeed in the first round of these playoffs. And I told you guys last episode, if they could somehow, and I said almost miraculously, get through this 3-game series with the Padres, I actually kind of liked how it set up for the Braves beyond, right? Moving forward, you can reset your starting rotation, which is a huge strength. And then maybe you can ride that further, but they just simply couldn't. And it just really fell badly for the Braves and how they had to, try to manage this first round. So yeah, the pitching had been your strength all year, was kind of suddenly a weakness just because of the timing and what you had to do to get into the playoffs. Offensively, man, it was certainly glaring, right? It was glaringly evident in this series, this extreme offensive advantage the Padres had over the Braves. I mean, it just was no contest. The Padres are the picture of a balanced lineup with power and contact. Most of their guys have speed. I think at one point ESPN made a point that every position player for the Padres is a former shortstop. That's very strange, and I mean, it's unique. It does tell you something about the athleticism of every guy that they have on the field. It doesn't necessarily play out to be a huge advantage for you, but I think it does show you a difference in what the Padres are putting out there compared to what the Braves are. The Padres in these 2 games, they fouled off a bunch of tough pitches. They ball over the middle of the plate. I mean, the Tatis home run right down the middle from AJ Smith-Shawver, boom, 2-run homer. The 2 doubles off of Fried that got the Braves down 5-1 in the second game, pretty much down the middle, right? They made them pay when that happened. And it wasn't just like a sudden ball down the middle, right? It was counts that they got into good hitters counts. They fouled balls off, and then they made the pitcher pay. And it's like, do you guys remember when the Braves used to do this? I mean, that's the thing. That's what's so frustrating, is the Braves don't do this anymore, right? Do you remember when, the Braves wouldn't chase balls out of the zone and they would foul balls off with 2 strikes, and they would drive pitchers' pitch counts up, and they would spoil good pitches and spit on balls out of the zone, and the pitcher would eventually walk you or leave one down the middle and make you pay. I mean, the classic example of that is the Jorge Soler home run in the World Series in 2021, right? If you go back to that at bat, that's what that at bat is. That wasn't a first pitch bomb, right? It was fouling balls off. It was getting into a hitter's count, and then the pitcher hung one down the middle and he demolished it. And, that's what it takes. Good at bat after good at bat after good at bat. And the Braves just weren't well practiced at having good at bats entering into this postseason. And they certainly didn't have as many good at bats as the Padres did in these 2 games. The Braves were hyper aggressive in game 1 against Michael King. Take nothing away from him. His stuff was really nasty, but they had 0 patience at the plate. It was it seemed like almost every pitch he threw up there, they were swinging at. I guess that was the game plan, is try to make sure he doesn't, he doesn't get ahead of you. But that's what ended up happening, is they just, swing early. It's 0-2 count in 2 pitches. And then the third pitch is halfway into the next batter's box and they're swinging in strike three. So they just were totally overmatched. The umpire didn't help in that game, right? He had some really bad calls, but not blaming him. I mean, it just adds to the problem that they have. So even if you could have got Michael King out of the game one inning sooner, right? You just extend some of those at bats. You get his pitch count up just a little bit more. Maybe you get him out. You get a middle reliever in the sixth inning, and you have a little better chance in that game. I mean, it might not have made the difference, but it's just one way that you give yourself a little bit more of a chance. And sure, it definitely seemed like luck wasn't on their side in this series. That's also been a theme of the year, right? Their hard hit balls found the gloves of the Padres, while the Pods had 5 infield singles in the first 2 innings of game 2. I mean, you talk about frustrating. Before those back-to-back doubles that made it 5-1, they extended that inning in the second. 3 infield singles to load the bases. But, it's the benefit of making contact. It is frustrating as the opposing team to watch that. But when you make contact, you give yourself a chance to be a little luckier. And sure, they were luckier than the Braves, but they had more opportunities to be lucky because they made more contact. So, look, I mean, it's just the fact of the matter. I don't want the Braves to suddenly turn into 9, slap hitters, but there is a time and approach to making contact and not striking out. I am so tired of seeing that stat that ESPN kept putting out that the Braves have the highest hard hit rate percentage in baseball. Like, I've determined that is the most useless analytic stat that exists. Because all that's showing you is how hard they hit it when they hit it. But if you're always swinging as hard as you can and you never have a good 2-strike approach and you're striking out a lot, you swing and miss a lot, you hardly ever make contact, then okay, when you swing as hard as you can and you do make contact, you're going to hit it harder at a higher hit rate percentage. But man, they kept showing that, and it's like, yeah, but they're hardly ever making contact, so who cares? Look, in the end, when you face playoff teams with their best pitchers going, the swing hard in case you hit it approach just doesn't encourage consistent run production. And it was most evident in game 1. Michael King is a really good pitcher, but he's not a top 5 pitcher. I mean, they made him look elite, and he's really, really good, but I think there's a different way to approach that game and maybe have some success against him. It was a total failure in game 1. Game 2, they're worse and better at bats. And I think you saw that late. And again, they did make some hard contact that they just were unlucky on. But they, at the same time in game 2, they weren't able to manufacture any runs between that first inning run that they did manufacture and the Jorge Soler and Michael Harris home runs later in the game. So ultimately, right, all you needed was two more runs. You win, you squeak out a win in game 2, and who knows what happens. But they weren't able to do that. Did they have the worst fortune of any team I've ever seen? Yes. Okay, I'm not ignoring that. Yes, Sale going down right as the season is ending really was terrible. And when you are relying on Fried to save your season and he gets smoked by a line drive in the first inning and it throws him off his game, man, I mean, it's just like that's basically how the season's gone the entire year. How is it? It's so frustrating, guys. How is it that the Braves had the best starting pitching in baseball the entire season, even without Spencer Strider, and then Sale, Schwellenbach, and Lopez don't even see the mound in the postseason? You just can't even get to those guys to pitch. It's very, very frustrating. At the same time, we may have seen Max Fried's last game, and it goes out on a pretty sour note. I hope it wasn't his last game as a Brave. I'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah, just a pretty flat downer of a 2-game sweep for the Braves to end their season. So guys, we can all agree, I think, that this team was incredibly unfortunate, right? Unfortunate with injuries, with batted ball luck, and it's also true, I think, that they did a terrible job of being ready for the season and turning around their poor performance as the season went on. And I'm specifically talking about some of the guys at the plate. The entire offense started the year looking totally unprepared for the season. Multiple batting stance issues. You remember Ronald Acuna was having just a pretty bad year, especially by his standards, before he got hurt. Riley and Olson, and just you can go down the list of guys who did not start well at all this year. And honestly, I just think that's a failure of the coaching staff and the hitting coaches. And yeah, you can ultimately blame the players because it's their performance, but that's literally the job of the coaching staff, is to fix those issues, make sure that they don't last for half a year or the entire year in the case of Matt Olson. And they didn't do that. And I don't know if there's going to be a change with this coaching staff at all. I know that 2023, you have a historic season, and Kevin Seitzer literally won like an award for coaches across baseball in that season. So again, is it all Kevin Seitzer? No, but they definitely did not do their jobs at a high level this year. I just think that's true. And again, I'm not ignoring all the guys that were injured, but the guys who weren't injured, who were playing the game, they did not perform at the level that they usually do. And you can even take out 2023. Maybe that's an outlier season that's just, you shouldn't measure it against that season. But even just from career averages, guys played below their typical production. Riley, think about it. Riley's old hitting coach finally talked to him and got him to fix his swing problems. Matt Olson, really, I don't think ever truly figured out or fixed his swing problems. To me, Matt Olson and his performance was the biggest disappointment of the year, right? He played in every game. He played at a level well below his typical. He's the one guy on the field that never had major injury, and his inability to even sniff his 2023 performance really hurt the team, right? In a year that they just needed some guys to carry him a little bit more. He just didn't seem capable of doing it. He never really fixed his swing issues. ESPN during the Padres series, you guys might have seen this. They broke down his swing differences between 2023 and 2024. His bat head is pointing too much to the pitcher. He's drifting towards the pitcher too much with his lower half. This is something obvious that certainly the Braves know is happening, and they just were never able to fix these things, to adjust these things. It seemed like Matt Olson's main fix was to just choke up a little bit more. And, he just never hit the ball with the authority that he did in 2023. So I really don't understand how these issues were never corrected the entire season. Maybe it's way more difficult of a job to fix this stuff than I think it is, but it's literally their job to fix it. And it never happened. So, man, I sure hope they fix it in the offseason and that he comes back a different player in the positive direction. So how should the Braves front office evaluate this team and what to do moving forward? 3 straight years of disappointment in the playoffs. Again, very different expectations entering these playoffs, and yet you still get bounced quick. The Braves have now, the last postseason series that they won was the 2021 World Series. 3 straight series of losses for the Braves. And I'm a little worried about that. You stop kind of remembering how to succeed in the playoffs, and you start getting used to losing in the playoffs, and that's not a good thing. And you might remember before 2021, that was kind of the case. The Braves had a lot of playoff early exits. So obviously there's much more to come in the offseason. We'll talk much more about what the Braves should do and will do, and eventually what the Braves are doing in the offseason. So you guys can look forward to those episodes. But I do want to talk about it a little bit right now, maybe just as an intro as to what is to come. Certainly, again, and I mentioned this many times this episode, a lot can be blamed on injuries. But I think the danger of just blaming the entire season on injury, it takes away an opportunity to really analyze the weaknesses of the team that exists right now. You're right. The drop in performance was just real for multiple players, and I think blaming it solely on injury would be a mistake. I think the Braves do have an issue with their two-strike approach, their hitting approach, their hitting philosophy, I think, really does need to adjust. And the way that they prepare for the season needs to improve, certainly. And I think a lot of those things are on the coaches and the coaching staff to be better. But yeah, there's definitely some things that Anthopoulos is going to have to answer in terms of this roster. The Max Fried question is a huge one. You know, everybody's saying this was the last start of Max Fried's career as a Brave. I think that's likely, certainly. It might be a little less likely in my mind than some. I mean, I think some are just, it's like a certainty. It's happening 100%, take it to the bank. I will be interested to see how this offseason goes and what other free agents are getting and what might Max Fried be offered from other teams. Look, the Braves rotation next year without Fried and assuming Charlie Morton retires, which I am assuming that, it would be Chris Sale, Ronaldo Lopez, Spencer Strider coming back from Tommy John eventually. We don't know exactly when he would be ready, and Spencer Schwellenbach, which, by the way, Spencer Schwellenbach, I haven't talked about him enough. What a huge development for him to be so good this year in kind of a surprising way. He seems really healthy, and he seems like a huge piece for the Braves moving forward. If he had not come onto the scene, the Braves would not have made the playoffs for sure. And if he had not come on the scene long term, I mean, losing Fried, Morton would have hurt a lot more. There would have been a lot more question marks around this rotation. So that's a really big development for the Braves that Schwellenbach is as good as he seems to be. So yeah, the Braves can't be certain about Spencer Strider. When will he be healthy? I mean, you look no further than what has happened to Walker Buehler over in Los Angeles. It took him 2 years to come back from Tommy John, and he really hasn't been the same guy. And so I don't want to put that on Strider, but there's no guarantee that he's just going to magically show up early next season and be the Spencer Strider that we know. I mean, I sure hope that happens, and it might, but we don't know. This is his second Tommy John surgery. So with that in mind, you might have to cover some innings before Strider comes back next year with some guys internally. I think because of that, you clearly need at least one additional starter. And maybe you cover that with going out and getting a cheaper veteran arm on the free agent market or trading for a guy. But I do think I think that's why the possibility of Max Fried coming back is still open. I don't think the Braves, well, look, maybe they will simply say goodbye and go for the cheaper option. But I think it might depend on what other teams are willing to offer Fried. You know, if no one's offering him a really long-term contract and the Braves could offer him a 4-year deal, 5-year deal, maybe that's reasonable, you know, around $25 million a year, maybe that works. So I'm not totally losing hope on this. I mean, if I was putting a percentage on it, 10% that he comes back, but it's not 0%. So we'll see. So yeah, the Fried question, in a broader sense, a starting pitching question has to be answered for the Braves. But the bigger questions to me in this offseason is the Braves offense. I know you're getting Acuna back, you're getting Riley back, but I still think there are things to do. There are things to adjust with this offense, right? The Braves have to get some higher contact, less strikeout prone hitters in the lineup. Let's balance the lineup a little bit. Let's maybe get a little more speed in the lineup too, if possible. And of course, from a philosophical standpoint, let's adjust your 2-strike approach at the plate. The positions to me that the Braves should address in the offseason is catcher. Look, Travis d'Arnaud has an option. Sean Murphy is signed long-term. d'Arnaud was still pretty good this year. And, a little better than maybe some expected. Murphy was not good, right, from the beginning. And again, he had that oblique injury. But I don't know. I mean, one big question to answer is how do the Braves view Sean Murphy and would they consider moving on from him. I do think he has value. Teams are very, the catching position is really, really weak across baseball. He's a very good defensive catcher with power potential. I mean, the first half of 2023 was amazing for him. You kind of see the ceiling of what he can do there. We saw the floor probably of what he is this year. So I think you can move on from him and get something, maybe not much, but why would you move on from him? Well, you got Drake Baldwin in AAA, and I have no idea what the Braves think of him long term. If they really view him as a potential long-term starter, he would certainly be a cheaper option if you were looking to reduce payroll some too. So I think the catching question generally is going to be interesting to see. The most likely thing I think the Braves will do is they'll just roll it back with d'Arnaud and Murphy. But I would kind of like to see them move on from Murphy and see what Drake Baldwin could do. Shortstop. Oh, and by the way, but one of the reasons for that with catching is Baldwin's a very different hitter than Murphy. He does have pop, he does have power, but he has higher on base, he has less strikeout, he has more contact ability. So I think yes, we haven't seen him at the major league level, but his hitting profile is very different than Murphy. I don't think Murphy is ever going to be anything of a high average guy. At his best, he is patient at the plate and has a pretty high on base percentage and will hit you some home runs. So I do like Baldwin as a hitter better long term. Okay, so shortstop, as you guys are fully aware, I've been over Orlando Arcia for a long time. I would really like the Braves to do something better there. I know he's a cheap option at a premium position. I would be shocked if the Braves went out on the free agent market for shortstop because all of those guys are overpriced. But I do think maybe they could consider a trade to upgrade the position, at least on the fringes, and get a different type of player. Again, maybe a speedier on base guy with a higher average to play short. So I don't have names for you guys yet. We're going to dive into a lot of that as we go in the offseason. But shortstop is another very obvious place where the Braves could improve offensively next year. And then finally, left field. In left field, the Braves have a lot of internal outfielders right now. They went out and got Jorge Soler at the deadline. Let's be honest, he looked terrible defensively in the outfield, and he wasn't all that great offensively as well. Meanwhile, the Braves benched Jared Kelenic in favor of Laureano over the last 2 months of the season. So you got those three guys internally. Now, Laureano, they'd have to re-sign. He would be a free agent, I believe. But he hit really well as a Brave. So between these three options, I don't know. I think the Braves probably will keep two of them. Remember that Ronald Acuna probably won't be ready to begin the 2025 season. Maybe he will, but they've said multiple times they're not going to rush him back. So, I mean, I really liked what Laureano did. He played really well, other than a couple of blunders in the outfield. He played really well for the Braves and is a little bit more of what I'm talking about. Now, he did strike out a good bit too, but the other option is you move on from all these guys. You'd have to trade Soler. He's signed for, I think, 2 more seasons. You'd have to trade Kelenic. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot. You could do a lot better in left field than what they have. But obviously, I think it's just another area where they could improve if they choose to do so, if they choose to be a little more aggressive in the offseason. And then the last thing I'll mention for the offseason is payroll. I mean, keep in mind the Braves may choose to drop payroll this year in an effort to get under that competitive balance tax. They've been over it the last 2 years. There are more penalties coming if they are over that again. So, I mean, there's things they could do to get under that tax, but we'll just have to see. It might mean that they're not able to be as aggressive as we would like them to be because of that issue. So, guys, whatever the Braves do in 2025, I can say I am honestly looking forward to a fresh season with our star players coming back healthy. I mean, just give me games with Ronald Acuna. Give me games with Austin Riley and Spencer Strider starting, and Chris Sale fully healthy again, hopefully for another Cy Young caliber season. This team is tremendously healthy. They will be, if healthy, they will be one of the World Series favorites again. So none of that has gone away. Um, but this 2024 version was so beaten down. And by the end of the season, they just looked worn out to me. They looked tattered and worn out. It's hard to look back and remember in spring training that the Braves were the favorites in all of baseball to win the World Series. And now we see the Phillies and the Mets are still going while the Braves are at home. Man, that really stinks. A lot had to happen for the Braves to be as mortal as they were this year. And they still made the playoffs, right? And so, in and of itself, that is impressive. But it still kind of feels like a failure, right? They started spring training all saying World Series or bust, and it ended up being a bust. I mean, it really did. So hopefully these guys can rest up, regroup, and hope that things go better next year. That guys can stay healthy, and that all of this bad luck, bad fortune, whatever you want to call it, turns around for them next year, and maybe 2025 will be their year. But in the meantime, we have to watch the playoffs without the Braves, and I am looking forward to looking to the offseason because you just wipe the slate clean and let's start fresh and let the hope start flowing again for the 2025 season. So, guys, I will talk to you soon. I probably will take a little bit of time off as the playoffs go, but I will definitely come back to you before the off season begins, and we'll talk a lot about what the Braves will do in more detail. We'll talk more about the Braves, prospects, maybe top 10 prospects. We'll do a lot of that kind of stuff before the offseason begins. And then we'll definitely be very active throughout the offseason looking at all the things that the Braves are doing. So, guys, I really appreciate your continued support for listening to State of the Braves. I'll talk to you soon.